Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're diving straight into Bryant Meyer's book, Engaging Globalization.
Yeah, a really significant work.
We're planning to unpack his core arguments, basically going chapter by chapter.
Looking at how he builds his case for understanding globalization, mission, and its impact on the poor.
Exactly. We want to give you a solid grasp of his thinking on these, well, really vital issues.
Okay, so Myers kicks things off in Chapter 2, Twin Foundations. He lays out two key elements, really the bedrock for his whole argument.
Which are?
First, theological affirmations, rooted in Christian tradition.
Okay.
And second, the perspective you get from complex adaptive social systems.
Let's start with the theology then. Myers argues that to really engage globalization theologically, you need a few things.
Right. He says you need to know God and God's actions.
Understand humanity, our purpose, our condition.
And grasp God's big picture for creation and redemption.
He really zeroes in on the creation story in Genesis, doesn't he?
He does. Bryant Myers highlights, quote, "So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it.'" That's Genesis 1, 27 to 28.
And for Myers, that's foundational. Human dignity, our role. It all stems from that.
And because we're made in the image of a moral God, Bryant Myers points out we are ourselves moral beings.
Which connects to things like the rule of law.
Exactly. That's the implication he draws.
Then he brings in shalom, which is, it's a huge concept, right?
It really is. Much more than just peace, as we usually think of it. It's comprehensive well-being, justice, peace, prosperity, human fulfillment, all of it.
And that leads to this idea of human flourishing.
Yes, building on shalom. Bryant Myers describes flourishing as, well, biological well-being, body, mind, soul, but also with a transcendent peace.
In relationships?
Crucially, just and peaceful relationships. Plus this mandate to be creative, productive actors in God's world.
Okay, so that's the theological side. What about the second foundation? Complex adaptive social systems.
Right. So Bryant Myers uses this framework to think about how history unfolds. He affirms God's sovereignty, definitely, but recognizes history isn't always, linear or predictable.
Things emerge in unexpected ways.
Precisely. Bryant Myers actually quotes Kierkegaard here. "Life is understood backwards, but must be lived forwards."
Ah, that makes sense. It helps grasp that globalization itself kind of emerged, didn't it?
That's the idea. These systems help us understand that emergence.
So moving into Chapter 3, Understanding Globalization, Bryant Myers jumps right into the difficulty of defining it.
Yeah, he lays out a whole bunch of definitions from different thinkers.
Showing just how hard it is to pin down one single meaning.
Exactly. And what Bryant Myers demonstrates is that globalization touches, well, pretty much everything. Economics, culture, environment, religion.
It acts on us, but we also participate in it.
Right, and you get these really contrasting views, don't you?
Yeah, some see it as this great force for progress, material wealth, democracy.
While others are much more critical, they focus on inequality, loss of culture, that kind of thing.
It's ambiguous.
That's the word Bryant Myers uses. He says, quote, "All of this leads us to conclude that the values, promises, processes, and outcomes of globalization are ambiguous."
He mentions Manfred Steiger's description, too, which I found helpful.
Yeah, Steiger talks about globalization expanding, intensifying, accelerating social relations globally.
And technology blurring the local and the global.
Right. But Bryant Myers stresses it's not just tech, it's fundamentally relational.
And the speed of change is a big factor, right? Tech moves fast, but regulations lag behind.
That's a key point, leading to friction, maybe even fraying trust in institutions.
He also brings in this idea of globalization from below.
Yes, from Jehu Hansel's. Focusing on migration, the spread of non-Western values, challenging that West-centric view.
So the West is being changed too.
Definitely. As Bryant Myers quotes Hansel's, the West is also being changed as a result of globalization from below.
Myers then details how specific technologies like wireless and digital media really kicked globalization into high gear in the late 20th century.
And he notes how this coincided with the rise of neoliberal capitalism, tech and economics reinforcing each other.
But it's important, as he points out, that tech isn't just a Western thing.
Right. The example Bryant Myers gives of the South Indian women using cell phones after the tsunami really drives that home.
Then he walks us through the different dimensions, economic flows, global trade, institutions like the World Bank.
The governance piece too, international bodies, regional unions, the shifting role of the nation-state.
And culture. The complexities of identity in this hyper-connected world.
So wrapping up chapter 3, Bryant Myers uses these metaphors, a gemstone, an elephant, to show you can't see the whole thing at once.
It's multifaceted.
Exactly. Expanding, intensifying, accelerating, changing us across all these domains: tech, economics, governance, culture, and us as human beings.
Okay, let's move to chapter 5. Two eras of globalization. Bryant Myers makes a distinction here.
Yeah, he talks about a first era, mostly 19th century, and then a second era building on that.
What drove that first era?
Primarily migration, according to Bryant Myers. Plants, animals, but especially people, traders, adventurers, missionaries, driven by scarcity, curiosity, empire, religion, a mix of things.
And he gives significant attention to Victorian evangelicals in this period.
He does. He sees them as playing a complex role. They weren't just about conversion. They pushed for social reforms, challenged colonial abuses sometimes.
Advocating for the whole gospel.
Right. Bryant Myers states, quote, "Voluntary mission societies responded to British colonialism with a commitment to share the gospel, the whole gospel, humanizing the empire in some places and challenging its excesses in others."
Things like religious liberty, education, rule of law,
Mm-hmm.
even campaigning against the slave trade.
Yeah, that campaign was huge. It showed a real Christian moral perspective engaging with that early globalization.
Myers links this to acting as if God's kingdom is the ultimate reality.
Mm-hmm. He brings in Walter Brueggemann saying, as Bryant Myers quotes, "God's resolve always translates into human action."
Like Moses in Exodus 3:10, or Jesus sending the disciples in John 20:21-22.
That's the connection he makes. Now, economically, Bryant Myers explains, this first era was different, more household-based, a kind of zero-sum game view of wealth.
Meaning, to get richer, you basically had to take resources or taxes from someone else.
Pretty much. Wealth wasn't really seen as something you could create in the same way we think of it now.
He also touches on the big religious migrations, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, spreading globally, with mixed motivations sometimes.
Right, sometimes spiritual, sometimes tied up with trade or empire. It was complicated.
And this idea of center and periphery.
Yes, Bryant Myers introduces that concept distinguishing civilization from the barbarian frontiers. He links it to the rise of modernity.
Then you get nation-states, mercantilism in the 15th century, more conflict, more colonialism.
And alongside that, in the 19th century, this explosion of scientific curiosity and new technology.
Plus, the huge theological shift from the Protestant Reformation.
Yeah, Bryant Myers emphasizes its focus on the individual, the work ethic, seeing productivity almost as a sign of God's favor.
How does he put it?
Bryant Myers says, quote, "Every human being was to be individually valued, and individual behavior became more important than church membership."
And then Adam Smith comes along.
Right. The wealth of nations. Challenging mercantilism, arguing labor is the source of value, that wealth can be created. A huge shift.
A new way of seeing the world.
Definitely. Bryant Myers quotes someone describing the impact. After the wealth of nations, men began to see the world about themselves with new eyes. They saw how the tasks they did fitted into the whole of society, and they saw that society as a whole was proceeding at a majestic pace toward a distant but clearly visible goal.
So the second era of globalization built on all that.
Yes, Bryant Myers sees it as amplifying those earlier trends. By World War I, European empires controlled vast swaths of the globe and its economy.
But he stresses it wasn't, like, planned by some mastermind.
Yeah. No, Bryant Myers calls it emergent. No grand plan, just lots of interacting factors.
He details the big tech changes in the early 19th century, manufacturing, steam power, factories.
Especially the textile industry in Britain.
And then by the 1840s, things really took off.
Yeah, Bryant Myers points to the telegraph, undersea cables, bigger steamships, railroads.
Suddenly, communication and transport costs plummeted.
Exactly. And refrigeration, leading to global food markets.
And all this tech-fueled empire building.
Directly, according to Bryant Myers, the scramble for Africa, expansion in Asia, Western tech serving the empire.
But he doesn't ignore the downsides.
No, Bryant Myers explicitly mentions the dark sides, colonies forced into global trade, economies like Japan and China forced open.
And another wave of migration.
Yes, driven by the empire's need for labor, often replacing slave labor with indentured workers. Huge numbers moving, especially out of Europe.
Okay, that brings us to Chapter 6, The Great Disruption and Globalization II, covering 1914 to 1989.
That's right, World Wars, Cold War, a period of massive upheaval.
And after World War II, the attempt to rebuild a global system.
Yeah, Bryant Myers describes the creation of The World Bank, IMF, JATT, later the WTO, trying to reestablish that global market framework.
And then 1989, the Cold War ends, and we get globalization too.
Driven, as Bryant Myers sees it,
Yeah.
by the spread of neoliberal capitalism, the digital revolution, and those international institutions getting sort of repurposed the Washington Consensus idea.
Focusing on free markets and poverty eradication.
Mm-hmm. Bryant Myers says, quote, "The current period of very fast economic growth and a more closely connected world is called globalization too."
And this model spread rapidly.
Yeah, Myers notes its adoption by the Asian tigers, China, India, Brazil, South Africa,
He also mentions the big drop in global poverty in recent decades.
linked to the Millennium Development Goals, though he acknowledges the debate about why was it free markets or international aid.
But then he makes this really interesting point about the church during globalization too.
A relegation of the church to the spiritual realm.
Yeah. He argues that development economics, tech innovation, secular missions, they tended to see religion as irrelevant or even a problem.
Leading the church, or parts of it, to retreat into a kind of subculture.
How does Myers phrase it?
Bryant Myers says, quote, "The push-pull relegation of the church and its mission to the private realm of spiritual matters has become largely complete."
He also notes the economic shift towards Asia.
Yes, India and China becoming major players. And he mentions research linking rising incomes with changing values maybe away from traditional religion towards more individualistic goals.
Chapter 7 then offers a quick summary, right? The impact of 200 years of globalization.
Yeah, it's a brief look back at the massive economic growth, the shifting centers of power, the global movement of goods. Bryant Myers sums it up, quote, "The last 200 years in a nutshell. As we move on, questions for discussion."
But with a question mark, falls dawn, things fall apart.
Exactly. Bryant Myers suggests the benefits haven't been evenly spread or maybe aren't sustainable. It's been transformative, but unevenly so.
Okay, chapter 9 brings us to globalization's response to poverty.
Right. Bryant Myers starts by saying, look, progress has been made, but there's still a huge amount to do. He points out where the poor are concentrated and the difficult contexts they face.
He highlights the need to understand their situation.
Yes, quote, "There is a lot left to do. Where are the poor? Their unhelpful contexts." He traces how the idea of development evolved in the West
For just economic growth.
to broader ideas like Amartya Sen's development is freedom, and he stresses listening to what the poor themselves say about poverty and well-being.
Then he outlines the global response, the institutions, the efforts.
The structures set up to tackle global poverty.
Chapter 11 shifts focus to Christian mission and globalization. A key point here is the changing face of Christianity itself.
Absolutely. Bryant Myers highlights the dramatic shift in Christianity's center of gravity away from the West towards the global South, especially Africa and Asia.
He gives some striking statistics.
Yeah, about growth in Nigeria, Brazil, China. As Bryant Myers puts it, quote, "The cutting edge of global Christianity has changed just as dramatically."
He also talks about the explosion of Pentecostal and charismatic movements.
A huge phenomenon in the 20th century, now comprising a massive portion of global Christians.
And Myers suggests this shift, particularly theology coming from the global South, might hold insights for the Western Church, maybe challenging that split between material and spiritual.
That's the potential he sees, a different way of integrating faith and life.
He also touches on Christian-Muslim relations in this globalized context.
Yeah, stressing the need for understanding and positive engagement, referencing Evelyn Rice-Sacker's work on joyful witness.
Okay, chapter 12, the missiological challenge of globalization.
Yeah,
Sounds crucial.
it is. Bryant Myers argues globalization itself is making an offer, a kind of competing good news.
A material good news.
Exactly. As Bryant Myers says, quote, "Globalization's good news is material. It can be seen, touched, and taken to the bank. It's evangelizing us, in a way."
Wow. So the mission field starts inside our own churches.
That's his argument. Forming believers to recognize and resist this alternative gospel and equipping them to be witnesses right where they are in their jobs, communities.
He identifies 3 big theological weaknesses in globalization.
Right, a thin anthropology, a shallow view of humans, a flawed understanding of power, and an inability to satisfy our hunger for meaning and morality.
Let's unpack the anthropology bit, reducing people to economic actors.
Or just social roles, yeah. Bryant Myers contrasts this with the richer biblical view of humans as relational beings made in God's image. Quote, "Human beings are more than rational, value-maximizing economic beings."
And the problem of power.
Well, power is central to globalization, corporations, markets, nations. Myers notes it's often misused, oriented towards domination.
But he says power itself isn't inherently bad.
No, he argues relationships are power relationships, and that forces us towards interdependence. Quote, human relations are inherently power relationships, and that this is a good thing as it forces us toward interdependence. It is a driver for relationality and solidarity. The issue is how it's used.
Contrasting domination with Jesus' model service, compassion.
Exactly. Intimacy with God leading to service, inclusion, non-coercion.
And the third weakness, morality and ethics being sidelined.
Yeah, Bryant Myers traces how the spiritual and material got separated historically, leaving globalization without a strong shared moral compass. Economics, tech, politics. They struggle to provide ethical guidance beyond just what worked.
It lacks a moral foundation.
Or a moral ecology, as Myers puts it, referencing Jonathan Sachs. That network of beliefs, relationships, virtues we need for meaning. He quotes Max Stackhouse saying, the moral fiber seems to go out of a society or a civilization if it is not sustained by a compelling vision of transcendence to continually fund its spiritual capital.
He uses Daniel Grudy's metaphor.
Yeah, the ship without a captain, destination, or map illustrating globalization's ethical poverty.
So, Chapter 13, The Church in a Globalizing World, asks how Christians can respond.
Right. How can we contribute to overcoming these failings, moving beyond just chasing money, power, tech?
He mentions a theological shift, particularly in Africa.
From liberation to reconstruction, recognizing religion, including Christianity, as a force for rebuilding society after periods of conflict.
He quotes J.N.K. Mugambi on that.
Yes, recognizing religions as social forces for reconstruction.
Then Myers brings in specific contributions. Max Stackhouse's Protestant view.
Stackhouse sees globalization as this complex historical process, showing both grace and sin, but with God's ultimate aim being grace, envisioning the New Jerusalem.
As a cosmopolitan civilization?
Yeah, Bryant Myers quotes Stackhouse. The vision of that end is the New Jerusalem, a cosmopolitan and complex urban civilization into which all the peoples of the earth can bring their gifts. Stackhouse argues globalization needs ethical and spiritual correction.
And Daniel Grudy's Catholic perspective.
Grudy proposes a global public theology, emphasizing forming lay Catholics through worship and spiritual practices so they act differently in the market, politics, etc.
Bringing Catholic social teaching to bear.
Exactly. Principles like human dignity, common good, solidarity, the option for the poor.
And subsidiarity.
Right. Bryant Myers quotes the principle. It is a fundamental principle of social philosophy, fixed and unchangeable, that one should not withdraw from individuals and commit to the community what they can accomplish by their own enterprise and order or industry. Basically, handle things at the lowest possible level.
Myers briefly notes other views too, like liberation theology.
And theoconservatism, showing a range of Christian responses.
And he highlights James Davison Hunter's idea of faithful presence.
Yeah, being witnesses within our ordinary lives, families, jobs, communities, institutions, working for kingdom values right there.
Not relying on individual geniuses, but networks.
Exactly. Hunter emphasizes networks and institutions. As Myers quotes him, the key actor in history is not the individual genius, but rather the networks of large numbers of individuals and the institutions that are created by such networks, using our gifts in whatever sector we're in.
And Myers ends the chapter emphasizing prayer.
As the spiritual grace needed for transformation, leading to action, change starts within.
Okay, last chapter we're covering, chapter 14, Faithful Witness in a Globalizing World.
Right. Bryant Myers circles back. The mission hasn't changed, but the context has. Globalization creates this contested space with its competing good news.
So we need to rethink our mission practices.
Yes, and he brings in James K. Smith here on worship and desire.
How the liturgies of culture, like shopping malls, shape what we want.
Exactly. They're not neutral spaces. Bryant Myers quotes Smith. We need to recognize the charged religious nature of cultural institutions that we all tend to inhabit as if they were neutral sites.
So worship becomes crucial for reshaping our desires.
To align them with God's desires for creation. Smith says, as quoted by Myers, if we are to be agents of the coming kingdom, acting in ways that embody God's desires for the creation, then our imaginations must be conscripted by God.
Myers also offers a counter-narrative to purely secular histories of the West.
Acknowledging the church's positive contributions, healthcare, education, citing scholars like Rodney Stark.
And he ends with 2 bits of good news.
Yeah. First, our call is to faithfulness, not necessarily worldly success. He quotes G.K. Chesterton. Christianity has died many times and risen again, for it had a God who knew the way out of the grave.
That's powerful.
It is. And second, our small kingdom-reflecting actions matter. They're signs of God's emerging kingdom, like the examples in Hebrews 11.
So wrapping up this deep dive into Bryant Meyer's engaging globalization, we've seen it's complex, ambiguous.
Definitely. And a real challenge to how we think about Christian mission today.
Myers really grounds his analysis in theology, helps us understand the dynamics at play, and calls for thoughtful, faithful engagement.
Absolutely. It's a call to think deeply and act faithfully in this interconnected world.
So maybe a final thought for you listening, building on Myers. If globalization offers this competing material, good news.
How does understanding that reshape your view of being a faithful witness right where you are?
And is there one area of our globalized life, tech, economics, culture, whatever, that maybe deserves more of your focused, prayerful attention?